Hello, everybody. My name is Luke Symington. I am the technology coordinator for AIMHO. I'm joined with me today by Biko Fisher and Bree Lancaster. This is part of the webinar centered around hiring and searching, and this is specifically the entry level portion of it. So I'm hoping to get some great insight from Bree and Biko. If we can have Biko actually introduce himself, just give us a little bit of context as to who he is.
Yeah, so my name is Biko Fisher. I use he, him, his pronouns. I am a resident director, which is an entry-level position at the University of Utah. Been here for just under a year and excited to share some insight today on my experience.
Awesome. And Bree?
Hi everyone, my name is Bree. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm a resident director, which is also an entry-level position at Boise State University. And I've been here since July, so almost a year as well.
Awesome. All right. Well, I'm just going to hop into our kind of first set of questions and our first topic. So what do you guys think about when you're going through and creating a resume or a cover letter? Specifically searching for a position. Maybe what did you? If maybe you've moved horizontally from to a new institution, did that look different than what you did coming from grad school to your first professional position?
I guess so. My journey in student affairs, I was an RA in undergrad. From there, I had started a grad program at an institution. I ended up leaving that program and working for a year in DC and then going back to grad school. So definitely utilized a lot of that experience in helping diversify my resume a bit and getting different experiences. And so when I graduated graduate school and was going for my entry-level position, for me, resume and cover letter, I definitely wanted to align my values with the university. And through that, I found a lot of universities that maybe wouldn't be a good fit because as I was looking at their values and kind of comparing it to the values that are important to me that I won't, give up, I was like, okay, maybe this institution won't be the right fit for me. And so it's a good way to not only weed out where would be a potential good fit for you, but also it was just a great way to learn about the university and get some of the verbiage that you would have to ultimately adopt if you were to go there. So that was kind of my general approach to writing resumes and cover letters.
So I agree with a lot of what you just said. My guess upbringing through student affairs is pretty linear. Was an RA, liked the gig, decided to go to grad school, and then my first professional search was last March through June, so COVID times. And so a lot of my answers today will probably be within the lens of someone who did have a fully virtual job search experience. So when it comes to resume and cover letter, I would say that what influenced creating mine and sending them out was a lot of what was just shared about like, trying to find alignment between institutional values and goals with my own. I'd also say I leaned a lot on mentors in the fields or functional areas I was interested in and having them review my materials. And what I would share from doing that though was try to isolate the mentors that you use to like a small pool of people that you really trust. Because I think everyone's always going to have their own opinion about what word to use, what format to use. There just really isn't one correct way to do any of it. And so I felt like it was really overwhelming when I was leaning on too many people at once. So there was a point in my search when I was creating the resume and the cover letters initially where I had to kind of cut back on who my core folks were going to be just for the sake of sanity. So just know that there's always improvement that can be made. But yeah, I think trying to find those people that you trust to be able to shine like on the stuff that you're going to be able to be the most impactful in doing in a future job. Find those people and have them help you out.
Yeah, I kind of ran into an opposite problem. I blasted it out to too many people, and then I would get like contradictory like suggestions. Right, some person's like, "All right, you should have it worded like this," and then another person would be like, "No, word it like this." And I was like, "Well, I initially worded it like this." And so yeah, definitely kind of too many cooks in the kitchen situation. What type of experiences did you feel like you listed? Did you kind of keep it just dedicated to things that you were doing in student affairs, maybe your RA or your grad position, or did you kind of diversify it?
I definitely As I mentioned, as I took that time off in between grad programs, listed experiences I had there, the working experiences, but I really honed in, especially on my volunteering that I've done in different capacities. Because to me, service and being able to serve and help others is a really big part of why I want to continue to work in this field and in my other career aspirations in the future. So I felt like, yeah, the cover letter is your chance to put your personal twist on things, but if what you're saying on the cover letter doesn't align with what you have on your resume, like if you're like, oh, I really love serving and helping and this and this and this, but your resume doesn't reflect that you have those experiences beyond, I helped supervise a floor of undergrads as an RA, then it doesn't, the continuity is not there, and it doesn't help paint the picture fully in my mind. So I definitely tried to include not just work experiences, but how I've contributed to communities and tried to give back in many ways. Because again, that's just something that's important to me. Maybe that's not as important for everyone else, but whatever that passion is of yours, and it's something that shows up in the work that you bring every day, then you need to show how it holistically affects the work that you do or the way that you interact with others. At least that's kind of the perspective I bring to it.
I love that. So the way that I kind of narrowed down what was going to go on my resume was I started with just like a brain dump of all the things, because I think it's very easy in undergrad and in graduate school or in other work experiences outside of schooling to just have so many experiences that you sometimes forget about. And so I just word vomited all of it on like a brainstorming document, and then started to kind of pull out what was the most helpful to frame for a specific position. And I think as the job search got more difficult for me during the pandemic and searches were getting canceled and things, I started having to look outside the functional areas I was primarily interested in. So it was helpful to have that brainstorm document to lean back on when I was trying to reframe what my experiences looked like. I would also add that I thought of the 3 things that I was the most passionate about when it came to housing, at least, and worked to try to incorporate the work experiences I had that talked about those 3 things. So I really wanted to work in living learning programs, really wanted to talk about like holistic wellness with students, and then demonstrated commitment to inclusion and equity. And so whether it was within housing or in other departments I worked for, I illustrated then on my resume those 3 things. And then those 3 themes were tethered throughout my cover letter. So I would totally agree with what was just shared, that you don't just say what's on your cover letter or what's on your resume in your cover letter. You allude to it in your cover letter, like, these are my values, I live them out, XYZ, and then you look at the resume and it should show that you actually lived these things out and they're not just these abstract values that you have in your head and your heart. So that was kind of more of my process.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's a really good idea, just to kind of tie everything together. Definitely. Talking specifically about interviewing, what general tips do you have for interviewing? It's definitely, it's not something like a resume or a cover letter where you can kind of just go back to it and brush it up and stuff. It's really something, it's like an active skill that you have to practice, but you like need kind of people to practice with. So maybe talk about a little bit about how you practice for interviewing for these positions, and while you're actually in the interview, what kind of tips do you have for folks?
And if you want to go first at any point, just let me know. But for me, the way I mentally prepare for an interview is, as much as I'm trying to sell myself as an employee or as a candidate to them, like, they have to sell themselves to me as well. And if there's going to be work put in, it's going to be 50-50, because I'll hopefully bring good questions, and I'll hopefully be able to bring ones that make them think and talk about their values, talk about their experiences, and sell that to me. So the big part of that is preparing and knowing what you're talking about. Because if you go in and you talk about a value of theirs you want to learn more about, and you're actually talking about a different university's values because you got 5 interviews lined up in the week, that could get real messy really quick. And so definitely preparing and knowing the direction you want to go in. Maybe you don't know every word you want to say in an interview, but you need to know a direction that you want to move in. So that was really big for me, especially going through last year where I did virtual TPE. And with all the different schools that you're chatting to, of course, that happens in the in-person component, but online as well, when you're trying to keep everything on track. And we all have those Zoom fatigue moments, and everything's kind of hitting. The last thing you can do is rely on your strategy that you go into it with. So you can't, shoot from the hip, or for a better euphemism is you can't go in and just expect to start knocking them out of the park right away. You have to go in and have some semblance of a strategy for each school. And it shouldn't always look the same because every school is different. Every environment is different.
I think the cheesy thing that I would offer is it's just so important, both as I've seen as like someone who hires others and as someone who is like trying to get hired, to just really be yourself. And I think for me, what that looked like was reflecting on how I show up in interview experiences, and how I show up in a phone interview is different than in a video interview. I have identified for myself that I seem to get on with people very well in a video setting. I can pick up on the vibe of the space a lot easier. It just comes easier to me than a phone interview does. So that strategizing that you were talking about was definitely something I had to do more when it was a phone interview, because I knew that I have a tendency, when I can't see or feel how someone is reacting to what I'm saying, I have a tendency to overtalk or overspeak or ramble on in a way where they just like lose me. And then it seems like I'm overcompensating for something. And so the way that I prepared was practicing a lot on like, not like humbly bragging, but kind of like talking about yourself and your experiences to someone else, just in a conversation setting. Because the more that I had a deep understanding of what I've done the last several years, what I view as my positionality and what I have to offer higher education and the student experience, then any strategy of values I was trying to bring in from that institution I was interviewing with or whatever was going to be a lot easier for me, because the core foundation of who I am and what I believe I have to offer was something that I could easily articulate. So that's one of my tips. But I also second what you said about plan very much like the questions you want to ask them. Like, I don't think I asked good enough questions. I think it was like, why do you like to work here? And what's kept you around? Which are good questions, I think, like sometimes, but I wish I would have thought more critically about what work experiences have I had that were really negative to me or damaging, or what things have people done that was really encouraging in a team dynamic. And well, I wish I would have asked more pointed questions to get those answers, because I think I kind of beat around the bush a lot. And so as far as me interviewing them, I didn't do a really great job my first go around. So that would be another tip that I would have, is spend more time than you think you need to on what questions you really want to ask your interviewers.
Yeah, it's interesting. In the mid-level segment, they definitely, when they're looking to hire entry-level folks that they're supervising, they said that almost exclusively the questions that they ask back to the committee is like almost more important than the answers that they give to the questions the committee asks them. So yeah, I definitely think that can't be emphasized enough. Thinking about it, entry-level professionals are kind of in a unique spot where they are oftentimes applying for like 5 to 6 positions at a time. They're going to TPE or OPE, and they have, 5 to 10 interviews maybe over the course of 3 days. How do you kind of avoid that burnout? And like, you might get a lot of no's. And so how do you kind of just keep that morale up and just keep going? Because that's definitely unique to, I think, us like staff members of our level.
For me, what I've done is I think back to the times where I felt super discouraged, but I always remember that I've gotten through every bad day and every bad experience, and there's always been another side to that crappy moment. And so for me, I think I'm very much not scared of the job search anymore, because I think if I can move 30 hours across country and uphold all of these interviews and do these interviews from my childhood bedroom in quarantine, then I can do anything at this point. And so at that point, it was very much like, I literally have nothing else to offer except for who I am and what I believe and the experiences that I have. And if I can't demonstrate that to these particular people, this particular institution, in this particular video interview, that just kind of, it is what it is. You can only offer the best that you have with what you've got in that moment. And sometimes I know that's not enough for some, like, especially if I was lucky that I had a place to stay at my parents', right? Not everybody who is like job searching has that, I would say, that privilege to have a place to stay in that interim period. And so I want to acknowledge that the fire under your bottom is sometimes a little bit like higher flames for some people than for myself. And so I think to keep your sanity, to keep your mental health in check, because that's going to affect how you show up in these interviews, is to continuously remind yourself, whether it's in journaling, meditation, if you pray, that like you just articulate yourself the best that you can, and that you prepare the best that you can, whether that's on the road, in your apartment, in your childhood bedroom, whatever. And if it's meant to be, it'll be. But that's my own. That's how I cope. I know that's not how everyone is. So I'm excited to hear what my colleague thinks.
That's tough. That's a tough one to follow because I think it was really encapsulate a couple different things. And, you know, when I was going through my not my grad search, when I was going through my search for my first entry-level position, I definitely relied on those around me by advocating for myself. So if I knew it was going to be a tough week full of interviews, I told my supervisor, like, hey, I'm gonna need some extra time off this week. And we talk a lot about being student centered. We talk a lot about being there for finding some kind of, maybe not always balance, but finding a way to find harmony between work and life. And so this is one of those moments where I need to kind of cash that in, and I need to be able to do what I need to do. And fortunately, I had a lot of good support in that process. And I know not everywhere there's going to be that level of support, but at the very least, you owe it to yourself to advocate. And if not, lean on the people that you know will advocate for you, because I can guarantee it, almost any institution, there's that notion of, we're really student centered. We're really here to care for you. We're really here to help support you. So if they're saying that, you know, cash in on it, because that's what you've been promised. So alongside the self-advocacy, you know, exactly what was said, that we've all gone through a lot of challenges when it comes to even getting into different programs, or, you know, sticking with the job day to day, and having that resilience, and especially the work that we do, which can be very taxing. Using that as a fuel to know that next step, I have it in me to make it. And I say this too, recognizing that as a man of color, that looks one way for me, but that might not be the same lived experience as a lot of people, a lot of different identities. So I recognize the privilege in saying that, that the barriers that I've faced, I've been able to make it through. And there are some barriers that are a lot harder for others that I can't imagine what that experience is like. So definitely recognize the privilege I hold in saying those things. But it's definitely one of those things where day by day, you got to keep chugging and really be your strongest advocate, because that's something that I think is going to be a constant through our careers. And I say this knowing that I'm still at a pretty early point in the long-term trajectory of my career.
Awesome. Thank you. Those were both amazing answers. What are some red flags that you've kind of gotten from interviewers? You know, maybe just some things that didn't sit right while you were, you know, in that space. Maybe you know, had pretty decent experiences with the interview, but what are some things to look out for? Because I know that, you know, I think Biko said it a little earlier, you know, it's when you're in an interview, it is a 50-50 split. They're looking to hire you just as much as you're looking to get hired, right? So they need to offer you that kind of equity in that conversation. And you know, maybe it's hard to kind of pick up that that's not necessarily being offered sometimes. I don't know if you have any perspective.
So I have two right away that I can think of. One is overall, like the interview, like the communication of the process and like the flow, I think really shows a couple things. If there's a lot of disjointed like communication and materials being shared, and I'm just not really getting a clear idea as a candidate how to navigate the interview process, that tells me two things. It's like, okay, either they've got a lot more on their plates than they can handle right now, and so this is falling through the cracks, or like there's this feeling of, am I not valued enough as a candidate to make sure that I can get through this process pretty seamlessly? And sometimes it's both, sometimes it's neither, and you sometimes never know. But it tells me that, okay, if I joined this team, and we can't like get a search done in a way that feels validating and affirming to candidates, I don't know what that's going to be like as a full-time staff member there. I don't know. And so that's one red flag I started to notice, and made me appreciate the schools that were super involved in making sure that I felt like I understood all the steps and understood all of the Zoom links and all of the schedules and the campus partners I was going to be talking to and all of those things. The second red flag was just kind of looking at, I know I've said the word vibe before, and that might be a very like Gen Z thing, but it's real to me. But like how everyone's getting along either with you or with each other in an interview. Like if you're picking up that folks aren't liking being in each other's company, especially on a Zoom call, or they're really not seeming super invested or interested in what you're having to say, there is sometimes maybe I'm just not like saying things that resonate with them in a candidate that they're looking for, and I'm crashing this and burning on this interview, and that it is what it is. Or maybe it's like they genuinely don't care what I have to say, or they're making me feel that way. And if I'm feeling that way in an interview, I don't want to feel like that as a staff, like as a staff member or a team member there. So those are the two different red flags, both like just the overall communication process, and then in an interview setting, getting those feelings of invalidation.
Yeah, ditto the vibe check. I know for me that you can read people, whether it's on a Zoom call or in person. Like if folks don't want to be together, you can tell, and that communicates something to me. Like, all right, either they just got beef or we got something bigger going on, and I kind of need to know about that if I'm gonna and go all into this process. But I think the biggest thing that stuck out to me that I've seen a couple times in interview is when people try to talk out of their depth. So if I ask a question about something that's happened at your university, like I've done my research, I know that something big happened, and I ask a question about how does this affect minority students, or how are you supporting minority students? And they're just talking to talk because they know it sounds good and they use some buzzwords, but it doesn't really mean anything. Like some people can say a whole bunch with saying nothing, like a lot of words for no content. And it's real. Like I don't need to be running around in a circle. Like if you don't know, that's okay. You don't know, like be honest with me. Because the minute that you start trying to get real fancy and seem like you are at a different level than you are in that understanding of different topics, then you lost me. And at that point, I'm like, I don't know how much of this I can trust because you don't know what you're talking about. So does that reflect on the department of the opportunities that you're given? Is it more reflective of your own, knowledge or lack thereof of the topic? So I don't have time to be deciphering people's, patterns of how they're giving information. So if it's wrong, I got to take that for what it is and really try to not paint the whole department that way. But then exactly what Bree had said, things, if they don't line up and there's multiple people making the same mistakes or speaking on different topics in different ways, then it just creates a whole mess. And it's something that I don't need to get involved with, because I don't need to come in and be looked at as, oh, you're going to be the person that's going to help us get better in this area. Obviously we're horrible at it, so we need you to come in and fix it. I'm like, well, I mean, if you need someone to fix it, you need to say up front that y'all don't understand it. You don't need to tell me or pretend to me like you do understand it, and then I get surprised. So that's a big thing for me.
Great, thank you for that. Negotiation can be very difficult, I think, for entry-level positions. I think, I haven't run into an entry-level position where the salary isn't fixed, right? Or there isn't even really room for that conversation to happen. I mean, maybe at least in my experience, I don't know about you two, but is there anything else that you can maybe, try and ask for or try and advocate for yourself for, when you're coming in? I mean, I feel like you feel like you don't have a lot of leverage, right? Because this is like your first job, you maybe you don't have a ton of experience. You may not even, I mean, I didn't have the confidence to do any sort of negotiation when I started my first position here at U of A. But maybe I don't know if either of you had any experience, trying to get a little bit more assistance with something, or what that looked like for you both in your positions.
I'll be transparent. I didn't push the negotiations as much during my job search because I knew a lot of universities were struggling with the beginning of COVID. With so many students going home from a lot of places, I knew that they didn't have a lot of flexibility. And there was a lot of searches where they had to stop the search entirely because they couldn't get funding for the open role. So I definitely didn't push that when maybe I should have. Trying to negotiate, maybe a little bit more in the moving fees or a little bit more in other amenities, but knowing that a lot of places weren't as able as maybe they would normally to negotiate those things. I didn't particularly have any experience with that, but that's just mine, and I want to speak for Bree, of course.
I didn't negotiate from at the start for a couple reasons. One was I really just wanted to get hired at that point. I'd been searching for months. I'd been in my parents' house for 5 months after living off for 7 years, and so I wanted out. So that's part of it. The other part of it is, honestly, if I was given the choice, like an option for some negotiation for some things early on, I'm not positive I would have taken it. I don't think we all have a lot of space to practice these kinds of conversations. And I will also acknowledge, I think being a woman as well, like, prevents me from wanting to speak up on some of these things without wanting to be perceived as insert whatever word you've been called. And so I think, like, that's something that I've been worried about. But as I worked, like, as I got to campus and started to work here, I started to notice a couple little things I could negotiate on. And so an example being, my residence hall is the only one that me as the professional staff member doesn't have in-unit laundry. And so I asked, is there a way that if I'm using the student facility that it can be comped for me, or like in some way, because like my peers have their own. And I guess previously the person who'd been in this position before just like would go over to the other RD's apartments to do their laundry. And I was like, I just don't think, especially in COVID, that that's appropriate. And I ended up getting the comped laundry and stuff. So I haven't had to negotiate salaries either or anything, both because of my own barriers I'm putting in and continuing to perpetuate for myself, but also I didn't need to yet. But I think when we think negotiation, or when I think negotiation, I think salary. And so I appreciate that both of us have brought up little things, whether it's laundry expenses or it's moving costs. Like, just know that negotiation includes a lot of things, and it doesn't always happen only during your hiring period. There's things you might need to negotiate on as the semester moves forward. I have a co-RD who is transitioning out of the role and is now doing like part-time remote versus in-person work, and that's affecting me in different ways because I'm the present professional staff member. And so I think there's room to negotiate. Do I get to have some remote days so I can have like that feeling of not as much stress as being maybe in the office around all the humans and around all of the virus and that kind of a thing? And so know that negotiation is fluid and can happen at any point.
That's a really good point. Yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize that there is much more to negotiation than just salary. And I think that's a really good point to make, especially for grad students who are looking to kind of find their first job. Great. I think that's really all I have on negotiation. As far as and this will be perfect for you, Bree, because you did all of your search in COVID, during COVID. So what tips do you have specifically for operating in a totally virtual world? I know that looks, maybe not drastically different, but it is certainly a different feel and a different vibe than just having to do in-persons. There's probably a different type of fatigue that goes with being on Zoom calls constantly. So maybe you can speak a little bit to that, and obviously, Biko, if you have perspective too.
The first thing I would say, and I hope that folks have found maybe like a middle ground for themselves after about a year online, but I was very stressed out about what everything looked like. And like I said, I was calling from my childhood bedroom. And so for 5 months, I had a sheet on my wall, like tacked to it, because I didn't want this color as the background. And I remember feeling very envious of other people in the Zoom calls having like these nice like shelves and posters and pictures. And I just didn't have that. And so I think try not to get caught up in that whole situation. Because as someone who's now like been a part of search committees, like I could not tell you really what anyone's backgrounds looked like in their interviews, and I don't care, except for the people who maybe had something that was maybe like borderline problematic. And like, so I think as long as you don't have anything that's going to detract from what you have to say and what you're offering, I think like don't overthink it. The other thing is, do what feels comfortable for you. So I had a peer who would dress head to toe like they were going to an on-campus, like in person. They had their dress shoes on, like everything, because it made them present themselves in a video call very confidently. didn't work for me. 8 hours on like an on-campus Zoom. I was not about to be able to participate if I was wearing pants with a button on them. So I think bring your authentic self in a way that you're not having to compromise who you are, but you're still putting your best foot forward. And so I think sometimes that means even looking at professionalism with a critical eye. If it's 80 degrees outside and I feel like I have to wear this suit jacket and I'm just going to show up sweating and stressed out the whole time, then that's just I'm out of the race before I even start. So I think, again, I think this impacts folks with all like gender expressions, like what you wear. I think I hope that you find that matters more to you than the people that interview you, because if you're showing up as your authentic self, then they shouldn't care. If they want to work with you, they need to not care about those types of things. I just bring all that stuff up because I think appearance took way more of my mental capacity than I think sometimes even just focusing on the content, because I was so worried, like, are they going to hear my little sister? Are they going to see that I'm, not maybe dressed head to toe in the fanciest of suits and that kind of a thing. And so I think even though you're not in person with that, socioeconomic class, like difference, like that where you can see in an outfit, I was worried that you could still see it in a video. So I would just say that's one of my things. And then technology, don't be afraid to use headphones. If you're afraid your surrounding areas are going to be loud, I would tell people I had the old like headphones that go in your ears, and might not look very trendy, but I was like, look, y'all, I think this is my situation. To minimize distraction, this is how I'm gonna, I just felt like it didn't look as professional, right? It went back to appearance. So that would be what I would practice with, is do a call. If people can hear your surrounding environment a lot, maybe consider some headphones. And if that's what you got to do, don't let people make you feel like that's unprofessional, because you're just doing what you got to do.
Yeah, that was pretty perfect on a lot of different areas. Because the big one that I was going to mention was really upending professionalism as much as you can. Like I already try and do that, but particularly during the interview process last year, like I would generally wear a polo or something short sleeve. And having your tattoos visible, some people are kind of weird about that or anything, but in particular, like in those times where I felt like I had to dress up a little bit more, I wore shorts. I never wore long pants or anything. And, exactly what Bree said, like if they care about what I have to say, then that's what matters. And that's what's most important when I show up, not what I'm wearing. Because, that's the content of who you are. And so that would be one thing. But two, I definitely recognize that I was fortunate that we had pretty stable internet connections where I was at. I am definitely recognize that having a computer that has a pretty decent quality webcam, and I could find those spaces where I could be alone, is not something that's afforded to everyone. Like you might be at a home where there's a lot of family members around you and the noise is there. And, I would hope that a lot of employers out there are recognizing that people are coming from all types of backgrounds and all types of places. So for us to put judgment on that, or for them to put judgment on that without understanding people's lived experiences, is really, really wrong in a lot of ways. So again, recognizing that those kinds of things put less barriers in my way when job searching. But yeah, I will say that there is, some schools that their first round interview was, you send us a recorded interview, and some of them use like specific programs where you couldn't redo the recording, and like my computer froze in the middle of one of those recorded interviews, and I was like, I can't go back in again because they won't let you submit multiple. So I was like, well, I guess that's a wash because I lost it halfway through. So you got to move on from it. But definitely want to think about what's the ease of access of some of these interview spaces. Like we try and do that when we're doing in-person interviews by thinking about, how do we get people from airports? What accommodations can we offer them? How can we help that ease of access? Well, that has to translate to digital spaces as well, in my mind.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, if they're willing to spend hundreds of dollars to fly you out to campus, right, then they can probably make some concessions in your totally free virtual call, right? Awesome. what was the impact of not being able to see the campus before you arrived? Did you feel like that made it, was that a big detractor? Was it a big surprise? What was that kind of experience?
Perfect. So for me, it actually wasn't that important to me. I care a lot about the people. I care a lot about the agency that I'm going to be given at a university. And no matter what, when I come in person to an on-campus interview, everyone's going to be on their best behavior, and everything will look real nice, and everything, like, you're seeing it in an optimal condition, which is not the day-to-day condition. So, you know, I personally don't find that as important as me being able to connect with the people and seeing what my role is going to look like. Again, that's me. And so I didn't really find it at a disadvantage of not being able to visit the universities, but I know some people, it's really important for them seeing themselves there. So that's just, how I operate.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I tried not to think about it too much because I knew it wasn't going to change. And so I'm someone who really, I think more just enjoys getting to see new schools. I don't know, the rush of going to new college campuses has never like worn off for me. I'm like, what, 25 years old now, and I'm like, you are way beyond undergrad, Bree. But for some reason, going on new college campuses always just makes me excited to be like a student again. So I did miss that process. I wouldn't say like it was a deal breaker. Obviously, I think what I did is I used what technology or resources were available to try to get a feel for it. So for example, whether it's like Google Earth and maybe just like walking yourself down the street to kind of get a vibe of what University Avenue looks like, or I don't know. Some city, if they're bigger cities, some of them have YouTube videos with like drone footage and you can see the campus or the surrounding area that way. So that kind of helps. I have found that I have spent a lot of my time and energy on my job and not so much my life outside of work. And so it's been a big goal for me outside of, like, now that I've finished graduate school, to make a life for myself that I sincerely love outside of my job that occurs, 8 to 5. So for me, it was really important to know not just what the campus feel was like, but the surrounding area. So I actually spent more time thinking about how would I actually show up as a human in XYZ location. So for me, it came down to like job opportunities here in Boise or in LA. And when I thought about my lived experiences, I was excited about the opportunity at the university in LA I was looking at, but I knew that I wouldn't be happy in Los Angeles. I just cannot function in a city that size. And so I ended up choosing a location that felt more manageable. So I think like we think a lot about, oh, do you want to be on the East Coast, West Coast, like Rocky Mountain, Midwest, like, but think even more specifically, does it matter to you that you can see the geography of the surrounding area? Does it matter to you that you have a downtown district? Does it matter that, I don't know, like the population is over a certain amount? Like, I don't know. I think like it's important to see the campus, and I love that those on-campus tours give that to you, but I wouldn't say that the job hunt often gives you a good feel for the surrounding area anyway. So if you get bummed because you find out the on-campus interview is going to be virtual, know that there's a lot. I found that there seems to be a good amount of resources online that'll give you a good feel for what you're looking for, as long as you know what you need and you can sit with yourself and visualize what it would look like for you to live there.
Yeah, I think that makes good sense. Yeah, I mean, I can relate to that. I'm a huge nerd. Like anytime I go to a new city and I know there's a college there, I will like make it a point to like go to that institution and just like walk around. Yeah, so I could definitely relate to that. Are there any pieces of the online or virtual search process that you actually enjoyed and would maybe hope sticks around for the near future?
Part of me kind of hopes you always have an option to come to campus or not, solely for the reason of if it's not going to be paid for. I know that was a huge, both between getting the right kind, again, right? I was, like we're brand new professionals. I can't speak for everyone, but I definitely didn't know what my identity was going to look like yet with my gender expression. Wasn't really sure what I was going to wear and how I was going to afford the right things. And so getting to not have to pay potentially for like travel expenses, and then the full-on outfit situation saved me a bundle of money as a graduate student. And so or just as a human in general. So I would say if there are accessibility concerns with coming to an on-campus interview, be it mobility, be it financial, whatever, I kind of hope that as we swing back into whatever is going to be the new normal, that we don't completely eliminate online engagement from the full interview experience, if at all possible, because I'd like to think that it worked out just fine, like hiring me, right? And so if that's something that you can do, but again, I think then that's going to bring up some new considerations and maybe HR processes and standards for what it looks like to make sure that you're treating people equitably in a search process, regardless of whether they would choose to like maybe come in person or not, because I think that can create some rift. So I don't know. I think that's a conversation for the soon future, but that's kind of something I hope that sticks around, is that option to stay online if you need to.
I agree. I think that we have shown, not just in student affairs, but as a society, a lot of things can continue operating with people working at home. You don't need people in physical places all the time to get things done. So I really enjoyed it because it also made the processes feel a lot quicker in some ways. Because I know when you have things in person and you're having to travel and you're getting multiple weeks worth of people coming in, whereas if you're doing it online, you can knock all that out in potentially a couple of days, a week, depending on how long your on campuses are. So I also like it being online because it'll expedite the process. And the sooner I know if I'm in one level of one search versus another, then that gives me a lot of ability to rest. But also recognizing too, like on the employer side, and I've seen at some places as they're going through these processes, they're like, oh, we're online, so we can interview a lot more people. And so they're like really loading up on the number of people they're trying to interview. And it doesn't bother me from the competitiveness of it, like compete with how many people, whatever I got to do. But on the interviewer side, like are y'all going to burn yourself out with this? Because you're interviewing way more people and trying to really load up and kind of bank in on this opportunity. Like it sounds good in practice that you're interviewing as many people as possible, but does that mean that every person is getting a fair shake at all your attention and getting that opportunity to really hear from y'all without it sounding rehearsed or scripted? So it's kind of one of those catch-22s being in that online environment, but I've enjoyed it overall myself.
Awesome. Great. I know Bree kind of touched on this a little earlier, way back at the start of the interview, talking a little bit about mentors. How do you feel like you leveraged your network, or how do you feel like you can effectively leverage your network when you're trying to when you're involving yourself in a search at an institution where maybe someone, or you're conducting, you're participating in an internal search? Both give me a little bit of your thoughts on that.
I had a lot of I have a lot of mentors that I love and respect deeply, that I think in my search process very much like in good faith kind of wanted to like live vicariously through me through the job search. And it felt like sometimes there was a lot of pressure as a result of that, like, oh, they really wanted me to interview at this institution because they went there, or they're affiliated in whatever way. And so I think this kind of gets back to the resume thing. My experience with my mentors, I actually ended up kind of moving away from leveraging their network support, because I think I started to lose my own sense of identity and hope and needs in my own job search. I was, oh, maybe I can. This is why I got to the LA school in the first place, was like a mentor that I trusted was like convinced that I would succeed in this particular role. And like, they were probably right. Like I probably would have loved it in the context of the role, but like they were thinking very tunnel visioned of that specific position and me in that position, not like me as a human in a life in LA. And so it really like became about me having to be like, okay, I appreciate this and I appreciate you so much, and this isn't going to work for me for these other reasons that I don't think you're considering, and not their fault for not considering it. It's my job to think about my own holistic experience. And so I think there's a way to maybe share expectations with your mentors, like as you go throughout the process or even before, to tell them what you're hoping for them to do to help you. And I recognize a lot of this I learned along the way. And so my hope is that you have mentors in your corner that are open to this like fluid change of expectations of each other so that you can share what you're learning. Because I wouldn't have known to ask a mentor to maybe not use their networking in a certain way until after I experienced the other side of it. I'm also very stubborn and I like to know that I'm getting a position because I earned it. So I am personally not someone that has ever asked someone to put in a good word for me, even if I really want to, or give me the inside scoop on a certain school or certain department. Cause I really want to find out for myself. But that's a personal thing for me. Yeah, I don't know. That's all I got.
The way I use my mentors during the search process is I used them to ground me a lot, not so much that I felt like I needed to get their inside scoop on every little thing, but I needed them to ground me because I'll tell you what, when I was started killing some interviews and doing really good and you're getting second round offers, I was smelling myself. I was like, man, look at me. I'm about to get a degree. I'm gonna have a job. Let's go. And I was getting a little, I would say maybe a little bit cocky because I was doing so well, but I needed my mentors to ground me, be like, all right, hotshot, like you're doing well, but you ain't got a job yet. Like you need to recognize that this is a longer process. And I needed that because, you never want to go in expecting that you're going to perform a certain way, that you're going to kill it 100% every time, because it ain't going to be that way. And I needed someone to kind of sit me down and be like, Biko, like, yeah, you're doing good, but you got a ways to go. So don't be that, there's a Greek, I believe it's Greek mythology, someone that flew too close to the sun, Icarus. Like you don't want to be that person that flies too close to the sun and then, burn out that way. And so that was the way that I really relied on my mentors, is to ground me through the process.
Awesome. Do either of you have experience navigating an internal search at the same institution? And was that different than going from one institution to another? Yeah, I have the exact opposite. I've only stayed at the U of A. I apparently really like it here. So I've worked, I did all my student positions here. I've done multiple jobs in housing here. So yeah, I was just interested. I was just interested to see if there was any difference in that process. But I think probably the primary difference is just having that foundation of people that at that institution that you can kind of draw on. It does give you a little bit of an advantage, just knowing the dynamics of the department already, and all of that. But I'm just a little curious. How do you feel institutions can make a more inclusive and accessible search process? Having just searched recently, both of you, what were maybe some things that you noticed that could have been done better, could have been improved on by institutions, maybe some things that institutions did well that made their process a little bit more inclusive?
I'll say, and one of the reasons I'm at my current institution is they did their best to make the search process as accessible as possible. So one thing I really love that they did is they sent the questions in an email beforehand, before your interviews. And, I think that's really good, especially for people process things at different speeds or need different levels of, access to information before feeling comfortable speak on it. And I really valued that because it showed me that they weren't scared to show their cards. They cared more about how I was going to respond to these things than anything. And that was really, really cool. I know that there was a lot of questions I had from, my current institution about what kind of ways can we help you feel more comfortable in this process? And we know that people hold all types of different identities. So if there's ever a time that you feel like someone has said something that has impacted you some type of way, know that we will not hold it against you if you need to correct people in that moment. And then making that distinction is really important, because if someone says something in a problematic interview, I think probably our first thought, as we've been socialized to approach interviews, is don't say anything. You don't want to jeopardize your status. Just let it slide. But things shouldn't slide like that. And given that agency in an interview to say, hey, what you said was kind of off key, I really appreciated that, them saying that up front. So those were two big things that felt like the process was made more accessible. But again, I say this as someone, you know, particularly like I recognize my privilege as a male there, knowing that being given the agency to ask something and say something in interview looks very different for me. As Bree was saying earlier, you know, when you were talking about negotiations, it looks very different for you as a woman and how that might be perceived by some. So I say all this recognizing, again, the identities that I hold.
So two different things popped up for me. One goes back to that idea before where it's just really clear communication throughout the process, whether that's over the phone, email communication. I'm a very process driven human. I value clear communication. And so I would hope that one of the ways to be like very inclusive and accessible is for hirers to have a good planned out communication strategy beforehand and not as you're going through the mix, but also open to understanding like, oh, we identified a gap, let's address it. I would rather a department reach out and acknowledge a mistake or a gap in some communication and try to like offer up some remedy in the moment, and acknowledge that mistake than pretend it didn't happen and then just like hope that I figure it out. The other thing that I was thinking about is, and this might just go to like a red flag that I noticed, but I think if you're gonna say that your department or your institution practices like inclusion and equity related values, then I want to see that practiced in how I'm being interviewed with. And so one of the things in particular that I think sometimes is overlooked is not a lot of people are very like seem to be well equipped on airtime and sharing airtime, and not just with their peers but with you as the interviewee. And so I know I had a few situations where I was in meetings with it was mostly like men, but like it would be like a one-on-one meeting with someone in like a leadership position in a particular part of the department or whatever. And like I couldn't get much of a word in edgewise just with them. And I'm like, but am I the one being interviewed? Because I have all this I want to tell you, but I'm not about to cut you off. I don't know you. And I you know, I don't want to be disrespectful, but I also like, I'm a pretty assertive person when you get to know me, but I gotta know that there's this baseline security of my job there, so I can be freely myself. And I think that is the age old tale, right? When we talk about inclusion is that if we want people to be themselves, then you need to have a space where people are going to feel safe to do that. You don't make a space retroactively that's inclusive for people. You build the space in the first place for everyone. So I think that that involves the interview experience in general. If you already know that maybe there's dynamic issues where you're worried about someone feeling squeezed out as an interviewee, maybe don't have that person participate in the search process, or have them participate in the search process in a different way. I mean, it's not a total loss for me, because then if I pick up on that red flag and for me it's a red flag, then I can use it to inform my decision about moving further with the institution. So it's not a complete loss, but I would say that's definitely something that would make the process more inclusive and accessible for folks.
Awesome. And kind of tying into that inclusive and accessible process, how can institutions foster more authenticity and transparency in their process?
I think that reputations are built in a lot of ways for one reason or another. And if an institution has a reputation for a certain kind of incidents happening there, or for the experiences of certain populations there being less than savory, like own it and recognize how you're doing better. Don't just try and tell me that we're a really great school for diversity and inclusivity, but if I Google your school and one of the top news stories I see, XYZ student population has released a statement about how they're feeling neglected, then obviously that's not true. So recognizing the faults that we have, because I as a candidate am going to be expected to do the same thing about what are your areas of weakness. Well, y'all have to be able to talk about your areas of weakness as well, because you have them. So take that in stride, knowing that while you do get to control the narrative as the interviewing party, the way that you do that will be, we can see through it a lot of time as candidates. If you're just trying to sugarcoat it all, I can tell, and I'm not going to trust you as much because you're not perfect. But you telling me you're not perfect, the way that you're not perfect and the ways that you're trying to make it better speaks way more to me than any veneer that you try to put on your whole institution that will eventually wear off. And when I get there, it's better I find out this now rather than getting there, being really unhappy, then we part ways prematurely. And then you have to go to a whole nother search process. It just creates a large mess. So for me, the biggest part to answer that question is know your faults as an institution, know what the message is being put out there about your institution, and own it, and tell me how you're making it better as a department.
Yes, all of that. The only other thing I could think of is I know a good follow-up, right, to this. There's a question like, what can the institutions do to foster this authenticity and the transparency, and then like, what can the interview, like, or what can the candidate do as well? And my inclination was to say that I think it's like, consider what you would like a candidate to show up like, and then maybe try to do that as well. So if you don't like hearing a whole bunch of fluffy buzzwords from me, maybe don't use a lot of fluffy buzzwords to me either. And so I think it's like it's a little bit exactly what you were just talking about, Biko. And the other thing, I guess, is, again, it involves critical thought all the time. What does authenticity and transparency look like to you? And in what spaces can you offer transparency and authenticity that maybe the candidate can't, or doesn't feel like they can, based off of the identities that they hold? You quickly pull up a Zoom, or you walk into a room and you take a quick scan of the visual identities that you can pick up in the space, and what you pick up then determines what your authenticity and your transparency is going to look like. And so I would say, when institutions are looking to foster transparency and authenticity, one of those things is in how they choose to evaluate candidates. And so maybe don't say that authenticity and transparency is one of the key factors you're looking for in hiring someone, because maybe they can't be as authentic and transparent as they want to, depending on who they're being matched up with to interview. Like I said, I show up once I'm here very different than I do sometimes in an interview. So that's one way that I would say that they foster those two things.
Awesome. Well, that pretty much concludes all of the questions that I have for the two of you. Thank you for letting me grill you. I want to be respectful of your time, but if there's any last kind of thoughts or things that you want to share with folks who are looking to lock down their first job, I definitely want to give you the space to do that.
See, the big part of me really wants to say have fun with the process, but I remember back being in the position and it wasn't as fun from the outside. And I know when other people told me to have fun, I would get really annoyed. So I definitely recognize now that me saying this probably perpetuates that. I know that there's a lot of growth that happened in that process. I think during any interview process, you're asked to reflect a lot on your skills and who you are. And during some of those reflections, I really saw parts of myself that maybe I wanted to improve, or things that I really liked about the person that I am. So as much as it's a difficult process to go through, take those moments of reflection that all these institutions are continually asking you, use them to actually reflect on your time over the past however many years it's been that you've been in a grad program, and getting ready to move to that next step. Take pride in what you've done, because you are, I think the last statistic I saw is 6% of people in the world attain a degree beyond a bachelor's degree. So the fact that you are in 6% of this population, there's a lot of privilege that comes with that, but you should have a lot of pride in yourself because you've worked to get to that point. So, for other folks that are moving, to mid-level or higher, I can't obviously speak to that because I haven't been there, but that's the advice I would give to those folks that are looking for that first entry-level position.
I would have loved that advice. That was such good advice. I would say, from my experience, the advice that I would offer that we haven't already talked about would be that the job search process is a phenomenal time to get to know yourself so much more deeply than you ever have before. And so take this time to not only be remembering and reflecting on all the things you got to know about all the schools so you can put your best foot forward and stuff, but really take note of how you're feeling and how you're showing up throughout the process, because then you will be more thoughtfully select a position for yourself when you start to get offers. And the reason that I think that self-growth and self-awareness is so important is because then later you're going to do everything you can to get a gig that you love and go to a school that you think is going to be a fun environment to be a part of, and you're going to feel supported. But there is always the chance that you show up and you don't like where you work, and there is you are not your job. For me, right? Some of us are, and like that's okay. If that's how you like want to live your life, your job's your identity, and that makes you happy. That is not something that I've been able to be steadfast in, because I've found a lot of empty promises in that, and it's left me very disappointed. So for me, I've had to really focus on, Bree, your job is not your identity. Like, you got to love yourself, and you got to love the life you make for yourself outside your job. And if you love your job, that's even better. But continuing to take these job search processes is an opportunity to continue to reflect on the really awesome stuff I've gotten to be a part of and the great things that I'm very proud to have accomplished. That's the best part about the job search. And so don't lose that sense of like self and that love for yourself, because that's going to be what carries you through the future if you end up getting something that maybe you don't love, or maybe it doesn't last. Right, like layoffs are real. And so I think you got to prepare for every situation. And like, just because you got the job doesn't mean you got the job forever, right? And so get right with yourself too. And the job search process is a great time to do that. I hope that wasn't super like sad. I think it's realistic. I'm a very realistic person. So that's my advice.
No, I think that was great. I think both those were great on different ends of the spectrum, maybe. Sweet. Well, thank you again both for your time. I'm going to go ahead and end the video. If you want to join with me in cringing at the sound of your own voice, it will be posted on the YouTube page. So you are more than welcome to take a look at it. I won't be, because I will probably just scowl at myself the entire time and like notice every time that I fidgeted with something. So yeah, we'll just end the video there on that amazing note.